These are not billboards. These are personal letters. They're what you would say if you showed up at somebody's door. What would you have to say to get them to listen to you, first of all? And then if they would listen to you, what do you have to say to make the sale?
Welcome to The Fix. Sit down with copywriting experts Nick O'Connor and Glenn Fisher as they review, discuss, and improve real-world copy sent in by you. This is The Fix.
So, Bill, I have only ever worked for companies either directly or indirectly owned by you. So I have a very unusual, I guess, take on the world of work and the way, the way copywriters work and the type of copy that we write. So I was thinking back to my first day when I started as a copywriter, and my first impression of a piece of agora style copy. And if I'm honest, when I first got it, it was really long. It was printed. It wasn't on video or anything else like that. And I just remember thinking, this is strange. I've never really read anything like this, certainly in the UK, particularly like the length of the copy. So I'm interested, like when you first started your businesses and you started writing sales letters and started marketing your products, why did you do it like that? Like, were there iterations before? Did you try advertising on TV and then go to that? Like, how did the style itself?
Yeah, we did. It wasn't, we elaborated it, but we didn't invent it. And, direct marketing had been around for a long time. And David Ogilvy, famous name in advertising, had written about it and how, if you had to sell something, you had to think about what you needed to say to sell it. And that was what really set the relationship between the writer of the copy and the receiver of the copy in a way that's very different from brand advertising. These are not billboards. These are personal letters. They're what you would say if you showed up at somebody's door. What would you have to say to get them to listen to you, first of all? And then if they would listen to you, what do you have to say to make the sale? But anyway, so David Ogilvy kind of explained a bit of that. And there are great books written by copywriters in the 1920s and 30s and so on. People have been thinking about salesmanship. And salesmanship in print is what we do. So it's not, we didn't invent this thing. But what we did, because when I started my career, I started it with a public interest group in Washington, D.C. called the National Taxpayers Union. And this was a hopeless organization of about 5 people in a rat-infested condo in the middle of Washington. And I was paid $100 a week for joining the team. And then I didn't know anything, but the guy who ran it showed me how they raised money. And they raised money by sending out letters. And the letters went to a donor list or possible list or some kind of list, any kind of list they could get. And the letter said, "Hi, this is what we're doing. Can you send us some money? We need it." And I thought, at first I was dumbfounded by the whole thing. He said, I remember on my first day on the job, I looked at this guy and said, "You mean you send people letters and they send you money?" So wait a minute, this sounds kind of interesting. So I guess it all depends on what you say in the letter. So then that focused my attention. This is like 1973, which happens to be 50 years ago that this is taking place. And and then I started focusing on it because actually this little group that was there was hopeless, and the people in it were largely hopeless. And I started concentrating on what I thought was the key thing. You need to be able to raise money. And with money, then you could pay lobbyists and you could lobby Congress. You could do research. You could do all the things that public interest groups are meant to do. So I set to work on writing copy, and I found I did it all the time. There were no other copywriters, and we didn't know how to do it. And the first sales letters to get people to join our group, and the cost of joining it was like $15. This was not a high hurdle that we're setting for ourselves. But the letter started at 4 pages and basically pretty simple. We need your support in order to do blah, blah, blah. And then they got to be more interesting, went to 6 pages. Then they went to 8 pages and people were horrified. You can't send people an 8-page letter. They don't have time. They won't read it. And yet we had learned long before that testing was the name of the game. And we sent an 8-page letter out. We sent a 4-page letter out. And the 8-page letter got more money. It was very, very simple. At that time, the direct response business was very simple compared to what it is today. All you had to do, you got a list, you got postage, you got stamp, you got paper, but you didn't have much variety. I mean, you couldn't go to the post office and negotiate. You know, they had a rate and they wanted their money. Same with printers. You could try to get a better price, but you couldn't. There's not much room there. Everybody paid the same price for printing, for envelopes, for inserting the letter into the envelopes, for putting it in the mail. All those things were kind of fixed. The only thing that you had any real control over was what you put in that letter. And so that really focused my attention and the beginning of, I think, our profession of our copywriters today. You know, we focus on what do you have to say? And of course, that led to a lot of mischief because people then began to think they could say anything they wanted, whether it was true or not. And that was very bad practice. But anyway, so that's what I was doing. This is 1973. And I continued to do it, really writing all the sales letters for this organization. And the organization grew from 5,000 members to 100,000 members. And it was then that I had an encounter, which I think is worth passing along because it's at the heart of so many bad business decisions. Because at the time I realized, you know, I can write these letters. You know, I think I'm writing these letters as well as anybody. And the organization was growing, more money was coming in, we were becoming more powerful. The Washington Post was quoting us, our representatives were showing up in the Capitol making the case for this or that. But in the office itself, we'd hired a lot of people. It was chaos. It was chaos. So we got a business consultant. And the business consultant spent his time looking at what was going on, the organization, how it was done. He said, and he reported back to the board of directors. His recommendation was that I should be fired. I was the only one bringing in any money. He didn't get it. You know, he missed the whole point. A business organization where all the desks are neat and everybody's following the chain of command and all that kind of stuff, it feels very comfortable, but that's not what makes a business work. And what makes a business work in our industry is somebody's got to write something that other people want to send money for. And so that's a very long way around explaining how I got started. So I did that for nearly 10 years, so much so that I write those letters in my sleep. You know, they were got to be a little bit formulaic. But then when we moved on to the newsletter business, which we did because we realized that it didn't matter what we said in Washington, you know, they were going to do what they were going to do. It was kind of a hopeless enterprise, but it was a good training.
So by the time you actually started getting into the newsletter business, it was just, you had your style, you'd found your copy voice, and it was
Yeah.
Like, I suppose I was just thinking, if you saw it go from 4 pages to 8 pages, I think when I started, it was 28 pages. And the last one I wrote, which of course is digital and not in the mail, but I think it was 72 pages. So we haven't, talk about inflation. We haven't, the real inflation is in the length of the sales letter. Although your point that it's because that works best is something that I must have had that conversation with 1,000 skeptical people who say, why are they so long?
Yeah.
I suppose it's a little bit like asking why a car has 4 wheels. It's like, because that's the way it works best. Like,
you can take them off, but they don't run so well.
Yeah, the answer is obvious, but not intuitive, because you only do it like that. It worked, but people think that can't work despite the evidence.
Yeah.
So that's the style. I guess I wanted to talk about the ideas, the type of things we write about. And I guess there's a seed of that in the story that you just told, because I'm guessing if you're writing fundraising copy for that type of organization, you're really selling a worldview. You're looking for people who share the same worldview as you, because that's how you would connection. So how did you, we have quite a developed sense of the type of ideas we want to write about as copywriters.
Right.
How did that sense develop over time? Did you know all along? Or did you try lots of different types of ideas and have to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, the two major ways of selling are indirect and direct. And the first thing people do is direct. They want to sell. For this group, we would send out a letter saying, "Hi, we're the National Taxpayers Union, and we rely upon support. So if you want to send us some support, we can continue our efforts on your behalf." That's a very direct approach. It doesn't work very well, because it doesn't engage the reader in what you're working on. The reader is flesh and blood, and he's mad. He's mad, he's irate, he's curious. He has all those attributes of human character that we like so much. And he needs to be stoked. It's like a fire. You got to put him some kindling there to give him something to eat him up with. And so it was very simple. We quickly realized that when we abandoned the direct approach, and we went to the indirect approach, which would be something like, the next week, Congress is scheduled to give away $59 million to, Afghanistan's homeless people or something or other. We can't, whatever it was.
Yeah.
It had to stir them up. It had to make them feel like, we're with you. We agree with you. We're with you. We want to support your activities for a purely emotional reason, and not a matter of logic. You need the money. They don't care whether we need the money. They don't care how we're supported. They don't care who we are. They care about things they care about, which happen to be the same things everybody always cares about, the power, love, sex, whatever. But in for the National Taxpayers Union, these were conservatives who thought the country was going to hell in a handcart. And by the way, they were very right. And so the country did go to hell in a handcart. And they wanted to do something to stop it. They wanted to stand up, to be counted, all those things, the emotions that people have about things. Of course, it didn't really work very well, but that's what it is. You're selling that indirectly. You're selling the sauce, you're selling the emotion behind the activity and not the activity itself. There's lots written about this in the books about selling, because nobody wants a floor detergent. They want a clean floor, and all kinds of things like that. Nobody really wants sugar and flour and stuff. They want a cake. So anyhow, when you go to indirect, which I think all our copywriters are more or less trained to do, and I'm going to get back to the more or less, because it's been a big failing in our industry lately. But it's the indirect that people want, and they want to connect with people who sense the same things. They do the same emotions. That's true in the publishing world anyway. They don't want to take advice from somebody they think is basically wrong-headed. So the right-headedness of the person needs to be demonstrated indirectly by focusing on the things that are important to the reader.
So there's kind of another element to it as well, I guess. So we know we want to write about things that matter to our reader and stir their emotions and go with their biases. Biases is the wrong word, isn't it? Because that's just their beliefs, their core beliefs. It should connect and engage with them. But then there's this idea of like the bell curve, or the idea they don't know about yet. So there's things that they know, the current beliefs, things they're worried about, things that they already think about. And we have to kind of fit our idea into those things, but bring something new.
Well,
was the whole concept of maybe you could explain that, the bell curve for everybody watching, but did that whole concept arise once you were in the newsletter publishing business, where, I don't know, the edges and the margins of the market are kind of where all the interesting stuff happens? Because that's, I don't know, I'm going to let you answer that question. It's a poorly paced and poorly formed, but you understand.
The bell curve didn't come to us until considerably later. I don't know when exactly, but we realized that even back in the National Taxpayers Union days, this is the 1970s, that we were speaking not to everybody, we're speaking to just a few people. And those few people were the people who shared our ideas, our sense that there's something wrong in Washington and we have to do something about it. And later on, when we got into the financial publishing world, we realized that people are always distributed, that ideas are distributed like every other characteristic of the human race. You know, some people are tall, some people are short, some people are heavy, some people are thin, so on. And some people think weird things, and some people think only things that aren't weird. You know, most people in the middle of that bell curve, they think what everybody else thinks, and they're comfortable thinking what everybody else thinks, and they're made very uncomfortable if you suggest to them that it's not true. And you can go through probably all of history if you could somehow do it, and see that the most people believe what most people do, and some people believe things that are pretty strange. Our world is a world of people who believe other things, and not in how far depends, but the newsletter business itself is a business of people who don't really want to get all their news from the TV and the major media. It's by its nature, it's alternative, and always has been. Back in the days of Fleet Street Letter, you know, it was trying to scoop the major news people by having better connections, and it would tell members of Parliament and others what was going on in a better way, because it really would dig in deeper into the stories. And in the financial world, the same thing is true. We wanted people who would look at things a bit differently, come to different conclusions, dig more deeply into the numbers, the stories, or whatever it was. You can't really sell a newsletter on investing by saying, oh, just buy an ETF of the whole market. You know, the stocks always go up. Just buy any stocks you want. They'll go up. That's not a very good sales position to have. You have to have something else to offer. And what the newsletter business has always offered is an alternative view. Sometimes very kooky alternative views. You know, we had some stock people believe you can figure out which stocks will go up or when the stock market will go up based upon astronomy. Or astrology, rather.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, they could be right. There was a period in which the lead performer in the newsletter world was actually an astrologer. And maybe, who knows how that works.
There are more of them out there than you would think, actually.
Probably are.
Once you've had a couple of drinks, people tend to admit to you that it's all based on...
Yeah, and they're not wrong. I mean, who knows how these things work? But anyway, the normal person, the average person, the person in the middle of the bell curve hump would not consult an astrologer. He would not do it because it just doesn't feel like what most people do. But in our business, we want the guy who would be open to the idea that astrology, the stars, can help guide us to making stock market profits. And so that world is our world, the world of people who are willing to think things differently. And if we're going to sell to that world, we have to give them something different. And by the way, this is where I think the industry has suffered terribly in the last 5-10 years, because the markets were so good. Speaking of the American market, was so good, and there was so much money made just stupidly, by people buying dumb stocks that went up, that the newsletter business, the people selling newsletters, thought all you had to do was to promise some other dumb recommendation and you would do quite well, which was true, unfortunately. But what it did, it led to a degradation in the way that we develop ideas, because that is just one idea. Hey, you can make a lot of money because this thing's going up. Here's why it's going up, blah, 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 blah. It's an idea, but it's not a very deep idea. It's not a very developed idea. It's not a very alternative idea. In fact, during the last 20 years or so, it was the mainstream idea. And our copywriters now are readapting. They're relearning the lessons of the 1970s, 1980s, when that wasn't good enough, because nobody really believed back then that you could make a money just by going along with everybody else. That was the big thing, which, by the way, was also true in a way. And Warren Buffett would say, you don't need a hedge fund manager. You don't need anybody. Just buy my stock. I don't even charge a fee. And it was true. And the stock went way up. Well, why was that? But because mainstream investing did pay off for a long time. It doesn't pay off now, in my opinion, but it did pay off. And Buffett was right there on top of it. And people would have done well just to buy Berkshire Hathaway. But anyway, our business is not selling Berkshire Hathaway. It's selling something new, different. And so we need new ideas. And that's the nature also from Ogilvy of the big idea. You need an idea big enough so it sits in your head and you think about it and you think, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then and also the corollary to that, it must be a new idea. And that's the hard part. We're finding it today. That's what I think half of our copywriters are struggling with right now, is to come up with ideas that are both new, alternative, different, and ideas that our edge of the bell curve might want.
Well, I guess you're right. If there's been a long period where people didn't have to pursue the alternative, they didn't have to sort of investigate the fringe so much because the middle of the bell curve was perfectly acceptable for its effectively. That's what you're saying. I guess the example that I think you explained to me, I certainly remember you telling me this at some point when I started, as a way of describing the bell curve, was to think about the beginning of this First World War. That if somebody had said to you the day after the Archduke was assassinated that what is coming next is that's gonna really unleash a chain reaction from the literal margins of Europe that will see millions dead in Western Europe and all of the consequences that came about as a result of the First World War and the Second World War, most people would have said, that's crazy. It's a fringe lunatic theory, but it was right. I always liked that because it has the geographic element, like the physical edge. But those ideas are really hard to develop. You use the word weird. We have to look at the weirder ideas, which I guess brings us onto the type of people that succeed as copywriters. In my experience, we are all a relatively strange bunch in one way or another. Most copywriters you meet, sooner or later, they reveal themselves to have some kooky, slightly odd characteristics about them. When you look back through top copywriters that you've worked with or, trained or recruited or whatever, what sort of characteristics do you think great copywriters have?
Well, first, I want to just refine that recollection of yours about the World War I beginnings, because that came up in the context of British regulation. When we started in Britain, we didn't know. We knew there's no First Amendment in Britain, and we knew that there was some regulation of investment newsletters, but we didn't quite know what it was. So we had a person from the financial authority. It's changed since we started. The regulation of newsletters has changed in Britain, but the guy who was in charge of it came to see us, and we said, well, what are we? We're in the business of selling newsletters, sometimes with very different opinions. And he said, well, you can't use newsletters to cause people anxiety, or you can't. You don't want to use fear. You can't use fear to sell a newsletter. And so that's when that example came up. I said, well, what if this were like, this is actually 1939. I said, what if this, and this is a true case because the Fleet Street letter did tell people what was going to happen without going into much detail. So what if it were, as I was saying to this regulator, well, what if it were 1939 and we thought something terrible was going to happen? Millions of people are going to die, concentration camps are going to exterminate millions of people. We're going to see a war with 150 million people dead before the end of it. I looked at him and said, well, could we say that? He said, well, this is England, we expect you to conduct yourselves as gentlemen.
We do, Bill.
We didn't know what that was. So we passed on any further definition of that. But going back to your question, who are these copywriters? Well, they need two things, I think. They need intelligence because it takes some brains just to put the pieces together. And it takes curiosity. You have to wonder, how does that work? Why would that happen? Because you're exploring areas on behalf of the reader. The reader is a person who, our readers, they have curiosity too, but they don't have much time. They have careers. They have to think about, taking care of their families. But they're interested in these things. And, when the COVID came along, there was a mainstream opinion was so overwhelming that it was very hard to have a different opinion. If you had a different opinion, you were practically a murderer. And, that's what the person that we want is somebody who's willing to have that different opinion and think it through and wonder about it. And so those two qualities, I'd say, intelligence and curiosity, are essential. But then you just have to work hard, because a lot of times, copywriters, myself included, sometimes you end up sitting in a quiet room, looking at a little screen of a computer, wondering, what the hell am I going to say now? You get a lot of dead ends when you're writing copy, and a lot of time spent doing things that don't go anywhere. I personally, and I know this is true of some of the copywriters whom I know pretty well, you go off on these byways because you want to write about the beginning of the First World War. Next thing you know, you're researching Serbian independence movement. It just takes you forever to get anywhere. But you do need to want to get somewhere. You can't just slough it off. You got to think it through and figure out how it connects. And then, I think that's the key part of working with a copywriter. For the editors too, the editors need to have ideas that the copywriters can explore and develop into copy.
I often wondered whether ability to fail without it being too much of a setback in your career is another important quality, because most of the things, I think this is one thing people outside of these businesses don't really understand. Most of what you've been talking about and what people talk about has been learned by trying stuff and then figuring out what worked and what didn't. And I remember hiring copywriters once, and somebody in their application had described Agora as the Agora companies as like the Valhalla of copywriting, which made me laugh. Because I used to say, well, we get it wrong all the time. Like, loads of what we do doesn't work. Like, that's part of the nature of exploring those types of ideas, is sometimes you'll write about something and nobody will care about it, or you won't get it right or whatever. And ability to do that and not let it knock you back the next time.
Oh, yeah. We both know one copywriter who I think went for a 10-year spell without any real success. It was terrible. He kept plugging away at it. And he in particular suffered because while he was hammering away on a theme over and over again so it didn't work, somebody else came out with the same theme and it worked great. Nobody ever understood why that was, but failure, and by the way, it's not necessarily a copywriter's fault. It's not that he couldn't get it right. Sometimes there are whole markets that go quiet for years and years. You're trying to sell something and it won't sell. You try, you do a good job, and it still won't sell because people are not interested, not thinking along those lines, that whatever it is, the stars are just not in alignment. So it is definitely, you've got to have that character of whatever it is, that durability.
Yeah. So when you look back, who are the best copywriters that you've worked with, or the people who produced the work that you thought was the best? It doesn't have to have performed the best, because some things sell like hotcakes, but you might look at it and think, but I wouldn't have written it like that, even if it works brilliantly. So who are the best people that you've worked with on that front?
Oh boy, I don't know. I worked with so many in there, and as you say, it's hard to. It's like, which dessert do you like? Depends on what time of the year it is or something. But Lee Euler was certainly one of the great copywriters, and his package, Plague of Black Debt, was one of the great packages of all time. And I recently redid that package, or tried to, and haven't done anything with it so far. But I just saw, when I was rereading it to try to understand it, I saw new elements to it. It was deep. He has some ideas there that are developed in a way that I hadn't seen before, hadn't realized. And that's the quality of a good writer, that you have stuff in it that gives you, it's like Shakespeare. There's a lot in there. You can spend a lot of time trying to figure it out.
It's also the only
promotion. He was great. I don't know if anybody remembers Pat Garrard, who's still alive, I think. No, I'm pretty sure he is. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard from him in years, but Pat came up with that 14 surprising predictions package in like 1977 or something or other. And it was a big, big breakthrough because it was the beginning of that concentration on indirect leads. Before that, everybody was here. You would subscribe to our magazine. He had a magazine. Subscribe to our magazine. We'll tell you about this. We'll tell you about that. But he came up with, just out of the blue, he explained how he did it. He said he was in the checkout line at a fast food store, and there was a newspaper on the side, one of those really cheap tabloids, and it said 14 surprising predictions for 1978. And he said, "Boy, I bet that would work in direct mail." And he did that, and it was a big, big success. Big success.
Just on the Plague of the Black Death promotion, that is one of the only sales letters. I know it was published as a book. It was one of the only sales letters I know that actually retails now. You can buy it on Amazon. Right. But it's I think all copywriters in the financial world look to that piece of copy, specifically that piece of copy, as the gold standard of if you could write something like that,
yeah.
I mean, you can write something like that the wrong year and it won't work. It won't
work. Yeah. It's got to be the right thing at the right time, the right expression of an idea, because the idea itself didn't have to be particularly original. There's nothing original about that. But that expression of the idea at that time was new, and it appealed to people.
It was that's a masterpiece of copy as well. I was reading there was an internal memo from someone I won't name, but about how to succeed as a financial copywriter. And in that memo they said to be a great copywriter in this industry, you have to be part killer, part poet. Do you think that's true?
Well, I don't know. I guess that's one way to put it. You really have to have the instinct to go for the sale, the killer instinct. But you have to entertain too, because who's going to want to read it? If it's obvious that you're going for the sale, it's not entertaining. People need to, when they get a piece of mail, and we're talking electronic mail now, they need to feel like the next few seconds of their lives is going to be worthwhile to read further, because the headline's intriguing. You all copywriters know this. You got to grab somebody, but you're offering more than the obvious thing. In a financial thing, if you say, here's how to make some money, people are not going to read it because they don't think you really know. They don't have time to find out if you really know. But if you offer something, this is why, something off the wall, a little bit strange, a little bit unsettling, then there's the hint of a separate payoff. And the separate payoff is that they're going to learn something that'll be interesting, or that they're going to spend a little while amusing themselves by reading it. So that's a big, big part of it. You're competing for people's time, and people have a lot of competition for their time. And you have to say that this is going to be worth your while. If you try, and you say, and then, as I say, in the last 10, 20 years, people got very lazy. This is going to be worth your while because I'll show you how to make 10,000% profit. That was, to me, was kind of a lazy way of doing it. So, but you've got to say, this is going to be worth your while because I'll tell you why, and then something you didn't expect, or something's interesting or whatever. When in today's political world, I'll tell you why Donald Trump is not going to run for president. Everybody's kind of interested in what that'll develop into. So it's got to be more than the obvious thing. You've got to make it worth person's while. I think that's the plague of black debt too. What? Plague of black debt? What is this about? It's not just about debt. It's about something else, a plague. So that kind of worked.
I quite liked it as a metaphor. I mean, there are lots of different ways of thinking about it, but the killer part was my interpretation of it anyway, was that that's the you'll make 10,000% part, which of course you can run a business on that, but it would be a bad and shallow business because it's based entirely on a transaction. And if you're not right, people will leave you. And you're probably not right if you're promising 10,000%. But if you can marry some sense of benefit and gain with an explanation of the word. Like Dan Denning, someone who had a massive impact on my career, he always said the best ideas were they explain and predict the world. And so the predictive element is the financial, that can be tied into the world of prices, I suppose. But the explanation is the key part, because that's, if you're revealing something about the inner workings of the way the world really works, and when you reveal it, people think that is true. And they sort of always suspected it was true.
Mm-hmm.
Like the debt ideas, I think when people read those, they've always thought on some level, whether they've articulated to themselves or not, that this can't be right, that you can't borrow forever without there being some. And so you're confirming something they've always thought. Sorry, I'm just blathering on. I want to go back. So thinking of the sweep of your time in the copy industry, what has changed and then what hasn't changed? Because some things that we've talked about today, you've talked about stuff from the 70s that would probably still work today, but then there are other aspects, multimedia, different ways of talking to the customer that have changed. So what have been the biggest changes, and then what's not changed at all?
Well, the biggest changes are the technological changes that we deal with all the time and don't really understand very well. What is the effect of that having all these different channels that you can go to, and how do you get people to, and how do you price it? To me, that's largely a mystery that has not yet been solved, because you have a very hard time. And you keep hearing about, this guy's got 1 million viewers on YouTube, or this guy's got his X channel and he's got all these followers and everything, but you don't know which one's really profitable and which one is not. You don't know how they convert. You don't know anything about it. So that, to me, is something very, very new. And what it did over the course of the last 10, 20 years, it elevated the marketers. We found that in our business, the copywriters who were king, copy was king, they became princes because the marketers then took center stage, because they told us that they could take whatever copy we had and figured out, how to move it all over the internet and how we make money by doing so. And that is different. And that takes some time to sort out. On the other hand, I think that the fundamentals of copywriting have not changed at all. We're still trying to, you need something to sell. You're going to sell something, and that something is related to emotion. It's usually hinges on some emotion that the reader has, some sense that he has, such as, the country's going to hell in a handcart. And if you can't connect to that emotion, it doesn't matter how good your electronics are, how good your systems, your channels, and all that kind of stuff are. So I don't know. And who knows? We see new things all the time, but I don't think the new things that we see and we get worried about are really the key to our industry, the key to copywriting. And the key to copywriting is still coming up with an idea and expressing it in a way that's attractive to the reader now. And the ideas, by the way, the ideas are not new ideas. They're old ideas. They just need to be gussied up for, 2024.
Well, let's talk about that as a sort of final question. So I had lots of, I threw this open to people online to ask you questions, and lots of the questions were, how do I get a job at Agora? So I didn't know if you were the best person to ask that. That's too complicated to explain why that's probably not the right question to ask you, but I'm going to reframe the question. If you were a junior copywriter, or you were trying to break into the industry in 2024, what ideas would you be writing about? What would you be pursuing? What would you be researching? Because I think that's more interesting than how do I get a job?
Well, I mean, for me, I would be pursuing the old idea, which is our industry was built on grumpy old men. We used to say grumpy old men. Grumpy old men, they have a little bit of money. They have a sense that things aren't quite right. And they want somebody to express that and explain it, work with it. And that, to me, is still the vein. That's the vein in this mind that needs to be worked, because we got so much in the habit of working a different mind, a different vein, which is here's how you make a lot of money on the next tech breakthrough, that we have very few copywriters now who know the grumpy old man market and how to work with it. So I think that's the opportunity right now, is to understand that market as it was 50 years ago, as it still is. people with worries about the future, about what they should do with their money, about how they should relate to the whole world around them, about how the government's out to get them. All those things are still there, and now they need to be addressed. Because certainly in America anyway, and I think it's true in Britain too, that it's not addressed by politics very badly. We don't have people who will say alternative things because the cost of alternative ideas in politics is just too high. You can't, there's some ideas you can't have. If you do have them, you're just out of it. You won't get the money from the big lobbying organizations, and you won't go on to win higher office. So those people just don't have those ideas. And so they are in the grumpy old man vein of the newsletter industry. And even there, people don't know how to deal with them or what to say about them or where they lead or how, it's a big picture analysis of how the world works. And then you got to connect it to a recommendation about how it will work and how you can actually make money. It's a big, big challenge, which I don't think has been really addressed very well.
I think there is an opportunity in that, though, I guess, in that if politicians aren't saying these things, or if these ideas aren't represented in the political spectrum, it kind of powers them up once you get them right, because they are new. You're not just echoing something someone in the political spectrum is saying.
Exactly. But then what happens? Then you can't get onto the sales channels. You'll find it very difficult to get on with alternative ideas, just as we did during the COVID scare. There were certain ideas you just couldn't get into any channels, sales channels. And I think we don't know quite yet, but we're seeing the same thing in the political views today. Political views are kind of the heart of the grumpy old man syndrome, and it's hard to say what you want to say and get into the large channels.
Yeah, I saw something from Al Gore today that's very similar to, well, he basically said the alternative media is to blame for everything and it should be banned.
Yeah, that's right.
But that shows you how important it is and how powerful it can be when it's done right. Bill, I've taken up far too much of your time already. Thank you very much for joining us and telling us the story of the Agora style. I hope to twist your arm into coming back on the show again next year if I can. But if I can't do that, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, Nick, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoy The Fix and want to get access to even more good stuff, join the Fix Accelerator today. Get access to special masterclasses from Nick and me, watch expert interviews with industry legends, join live copy feedback sessions every week, and get connected to our very own private copy network. Visit thefixaccelerator.com for more information.